Okay, so I think given we are now about 44 people, so let me get started. So feel free to just ask me things on the chat itself instead of going to questions, because on this platform, question shows up below my screen, so I won't be able to see it, but I can see chat on my right side. So please feel free to put everything on the chat itself. Okay, so first question. So my whole idea is today's session is very introduction. So I'm not expecting any prior knowledge of Kubernetes of any kind. So this thing is really basic is what we are trying to be going to do from today. Okay, so I'll tell a little bit about myself, then I will come to the particular slides. So I'm Anurag Agarwal. I've been in the industry for last 23 years. I started my career in 1997. Started working with Veritas. Before that, I was at IISc Bangalore. I've for first 12 years I worked in the core systems areas like file system, clustering. I was in Bay Area for a few years, filed a bunch of patents in the clustering and fault tolerant machines and things like that. So I have seen at Veritas the high availability systems or clustering solutions from very closely. I was part of that team. So I understand the challenges of an high availability system. See, it is relatively difficult to get a system working in the good parts, but it is an order of magnitude difficult to do the failure handling. And HA is something which is very hard, very clumsy, very difficult to really get it right. And I was very pleasantly surprised when I came across Kubernetes, started playing with that, started doing some real interesting stuff with this, that the Kubernetes has taken the high availability to very different orbit altogether. It has solved a very difficult problem, and it made it so easy where now people probably are going to be saying that, yeah, HA, we take it for granted. Just coming for that background, I can tell you guys, HA is one of the most difficult problem. And even when Kubernetes is going to provide right infrastructure to take care of the high availability at the infra level, one need to really design the whole system appropriately for it to really work. But I'm really happy to see Kubernetes has taken a lot of pain to really solve a lot of very hard problems. And we'll look into those as we go forward. So continuing about me, so in 2008, I did my first startup. I started working on taking the GFS. Some of you from a storage background might know ZFS is a Solaris file system. And we have taken that from Solaris, which was an open source project, and ported the GFS to Linux. That was our claim to fame. We got acquired by a US company, worked with them for a few years on SSDs. And then for last 6-7 years, I've been trying to do different operations kind of startups. Like currently, I am really leading a fintech startup. And now I'm trying to get into Kubernetes from the, so I started an initiative called Amber Academy. So that this initiative is all about learning, training, consulting around Kubernetes and DevOps. So that's kind of quick background on me. So one of the question Jagdishan is asking is Kubernetes works based on OpenStack? Not really. Kubernetes is not really based on OpenStack. It's an independent system, whereas OpenStack is a more like an open source system designed for virtual machine, whereas Kubernetes is all about containers. So we'll come to that, Jagdish, and as you follow the things, you'll figure out how this thing is different from OpenStack. Okay, so Sanket, I'll ask, so hold on your question about the difference between Docker and Kubernetes. That will become apparent as we walk through today's journey of the introduction to Kubernetes. I'm going to cover that in some details. Okay. So before we come to even containers, so this is probably something lot of us who have been around in the industry for 10 plus years would have been very familiar with this kind of data center architecture. But people who started their journey as a native in the cloud might see this whole picture very, very alien. So this was the data center architecture for during .com era, and even today, more or less any company having their own captive data center, the picture will look like more or less this way. So typically what you have is you have a public interface to internet. And from there, basically, that's where you have your firewall and other things. And then basically certain data could you please move video panel to most right? I don't know, Deepak. Can everybody see my slides properly? Some people are saying yes, some people are saying no. So I don't know what to really take out of this. Okay, guys, just try to follow my discussion. I will provide the slides also, so don't worry too much about that. Okay, compute nodes are hiding. That's okay, guys. Don't worry too much about that particular part. Okay, is this helping now? And that Ubuntu Linux screen, there's nothing in that right now, so don't worry about that either right now. Okay, thanks. Okay. So basically, all I'm trying to really say here is a typical data center. You have the front-end master nodes, and then the request comes to data center through those master nodes. And behind that, you typically have the compute node behind the company's local LAN. And then all the data is typically stored either on the NAS or SAN through mostly fiber channel, either over the copper or the fiber fabric. And then basically that's typically the data center architecture, which has been around for about 20-25 years. So this has been the backbone of the lot of companies. Even today, your stock exchange, your banks basically runs on this kind of an architecture. Now, what happened? See, why this architecture, which has been so stable, has given the rise to a lot of interesting companies, is kind of moving on. Basically, what began to happen is a new kind of architecture begin to happen, which is companies like Yahoo, Google, Amazon. So these companies did not really start with the traditional data center architecture at all. So they created a architecture which is more of a cloud architecture, and their architecture has been very different. These guys never really had any data to be shared. So everything was server-centric structure, distributed systems, but they were growing at a very, very fast and phenomenal pace. But something interesting what these guys had figured out about 10, 15 years back is they started opening their compute infrastructure to the cloud, to the everybody, to the public in some sense. So they allowed people to start hosting their applications in their cloud. And that has basically given rise to something very, very different, where companies which used to really take weeks to months to procure a server, now within few minutes you can procure a virtual machine. You can scale up and down. You don't have capex anymore. So that has changed the whole IT infrastructure significantly. And because of that, what has happened is now companies, the CIOs of the companies, finance guys, they are pushing companies to start really getting into cloud architecture. So every company is saying that every company need to have some kind of cloud in their story. So you might be full cloud, you might be hybrid cloud, but people need to start going from on-premise, which is predominant data center architecture right now, to hybrid cloud, and eventual goal is all in cloud. And something which people want to do beyond that is nobody wants to get logged in with any one particular cloud vendor. So now you want to do multi-cloud. You want to say that whichever cloud is the cheapest, I should have a freedom to move out. Although the cloud vendors are going to be doing their best to prevent you by really having very expensive rates to prevent your data to move out. They will bring in data in will be very cheap, but there will be new architecture, there will be new solutions which are going to be enabling multi-cloud, and that's where the Kubernetes becomes very, very interesting. Okay, so one more thing also which has happened significantly, and this is a lot of engineers can really appreciate this particular picture. So what has happened over last few years? See, when about 15, 20 years back when I was at Veritas, our typical release cycles used to be more like we used to do one major release once a year. But from feature development to production going for something significant, it used to take 3 to 4 years time. And similarly, the dev team used to be very, very independent or very, very different team. And typical engineering team never had the operations team with them. Their product was mostly installed at the customer site, and that's where the operations team used to come into the picture. But with the whole journey going to the cloud, where you begin to have very, very quick cycles, sprint, which are typically few weeks sprints, your code get revved very often, and now companies are talking about multiple times a day code can change. So then practically everybody need to be aware of how testing needs to be done, how operations team works, how to get something live, things like that. So DevOps, which is basically an intersection of three skills: development, QA, and operations. So DevOps, although somebody might say DevOps is a new role, yes, that is true. But in some sense, everybody in the engineering need to really have DevOps skill. So this is a significant change in the way things have progressed, and that essentially what I was meaning by saying that I believe that Kubernetes sooner or later is going to become a central tool used practically by everybody in the organization. And what I mean that I don't really mean that everybody in the organization is going to become the great Kubernetes expert. It will be at least like virtual machines become ubiquitous in organizations now. Everybody knows how to use virtual machines. They may not be expert in configuring the VMware infrastructure and everything, but they know how to use it. So similarly, I believe sooner or later, a lot of companies will move to Kubernetes becoming a default infrastructure. CI/CDs are going to become very, very common and things like that. So sooner people get to understand this is going to be good for everybody. Okay. So let me really take this thing. So I'm trying to give like different perspective to build the story around the Kubernetes. So it will take me some time to come to that. So far I talked about how data center architecture has changed. Then we talked about the different roles in the organization. One slide, what I kind of skipped was one more thing which has happened probably about 15 years back is virtual machines. See, first time when virtual machines came, it used to be something. So let's talk about why virtual machines became interesting to start with. See, typically in an organization, why do you need machines? You need machines to really host an application. And typically you have multi-tier applications in the organization where you have web tier, app tier, and database tier. And database tier, I mean, is going to be where you are going to keep data, where for whether you are doing OLTP, whether you are doing the OLAP, all kind of data will remain in the database tier. And then application could be your transactional application, it could be your analytics application, what it might be. But what you used to see in the earlier part of the organizations, they tend to have very few applications. Typically, an organization might have a few dozen of applications. But over last 10, 15 years, number of applications an organization started having became, that number became very, very large. And I know like some of the enterprise organization these days even have like hundreds or thousands of applications. And typically an application has dependency on lot of different libraries, lot of different version of OS, different kind of environments and all that. And inadvertently, if you were to really change your environment of something in the system, that might begin to break some other application. So just for that reason, people begin to say that I want to make sure I have an isolated environment. So how to get isolated environment? You say, give me my own machine, give my own device, and I'm going to host only my application there. So, but because of that, what began to happen was the proliferation of servers, and average utilization of server went down significantly. And when VMware started making its pitch, they saw that average utilization of the server in the data center was not even 10%. So they made a great pitch saying that I can reduce your number of servers by consolidating and by giving a virtual server to each and every application. What does an application need most of the time? All it needs is a specific version of an OS, a specific version of specific version of different libraries, different applications, and that's about it, right? So VMware started really providing that virtual OS environment to each and every application. That's how the VMs become very, very common. And with that one, the average server utilization began to become more like 30-40%. And that has created a multi-billion industry around virtual machines. So that is more on the server side. But now if you see on the screen, on the left-hand side, I have something called monolithic architecture. So let's look at the things from that point of view. On one hand, basically, you have virtual machines or server, but typically the application architecture so far has been a single monolithic application, which could be very large. It will do your emails, it will do the messaging, it will do your transaction processing and everything. So everything together could be, and here monolithic doesn't mean that I have only single node database or single node my business layer. All it means is all the layers are very tightly integrated. You have function call layer, function call interface to really interact between different layers. So this is basically monolithic architecture. So problem with the monolithic architecture is it works beautifully as long as you know everything what you want. You can do your capacity planning properly upfront. But moment you want to scale, only you can scale it just by either putting large number of machines or larger machines. So compared to that one, the cloud native companies, Google, Amazon of the world, they came up with a new architecture called microservice, where each of the service got defined as an independent, loosely coupled piece of service. It can be written in any language what you feel like, as long as your interface is very well defined, which again become a loosely coupled interface of basically the REST API. As long as you publish the REST API, anybody want to really consume something, you need to really have access to those REST APIs, and that's about it. Now, if you want to scale a specific microservice, you just scale that specific microservice. You don't need to go and scale the whole thing. So that's how the new architecture is becoming prominent, dominant, and you probably must be knowing that a lot of companies are right now running project to really convert their existing monolithic application into microservice architecture. And this is where you will be seeing that Dockers really fit very, very well in this whole picture. So typically what you will try to do is you will say for every microservice, which is basically a relatively lightweight operation, right? Lightweight service. So do I really need a heavyweight virtual machine? Or can I really have something much lighter weight? Because all I need, yes, so microservice example, you can say, yes, Docker. So container is the way to implement the microservice cache. And so we'll come to that in a minute. But yes, there is an analogy of microservice versus container. And Docker is one of the container implementation tool or mechanism, you can say. So the difference between container versus the virtual machine has been, in a virtual machine, you still have your abstraction is at the hardware level. So you are virtualizing the hardware environment, and that's what you are running on hypervisor. On that hypervisor, So on the hypervisor, you have multiple virtual machines, and each of the virtual machine has its own guest operating system. And then on top of that, you have your basically libraries, binaries, and on top of that, you are running your application. So whereas the container system, what they have done is they said that, do I need to really have so many copies of operating system running on the same machine? Or can I really do an abstraction where I say operating system can all be common? And I can just run a very lightweight container engine. And top of that, I can really run my binary on top of that. Okay. So, okay, so monolithic example will not be really the whole VMware. Monolithic example, a good example of monolithic is going to be, you have a single application which has email server, which has messaging, which has database processing, everything together. So that becomes the monolithic example. So Sanket, you hold on the virtual machine. Basically, see, even virtual machine can be used to implement microservice, but hold on that particular question for a few minutes. Later on, I can really show you something where you can contrast the virtual machine versus container to a certain extent. Okay. So what I'll do is basically, I'm going to run you something what I really enjoyed really seeing and talking to a lot of people. So Kubernetes has put together a very interesting comic, very interesting way of illustrating the concept of the Kubernetes. I don't know how many of you have come across this particular comic. If not, it will be great pleasure to really walk through this. If yes, then bear with us and still try to really make some sense out of the whole thing. So Ahmed is asking, is a container is a kind of virtual machine that runs on host OS where Docker install? Yes and no. So containers can run inside a virtual machine. It can run on a physical machine also. But difference in a virtual machine and container is going to be, every virtual machine has to run its own instance of OS, whereas each of the container is not going to be running a independent copy of operating system in each and every container. So container is just going to give an application layer in some sense. If it's not clear, hold on for a few minutes and then see if we can clarify that when I'm going to show you more of the internals of the Docker today. Okay, so let me continue here. Okay, so here is our one of us like DevOps person. He's more of the operation guy, not the DevOps person. So his name is Jason. He runs the IT. So in his past incarnation, he used to be a warrior. He used to fight battles, and then he joined an IT company as a IT manager, a person who runs the IT, and he thought his life was going to be easy, but looks like his life is going to be life has become even more difficult. So his company name is MMO, is a great hit, but operation is huge problem. So some machine kaputs, which had some names, some hardcoded IP address, and Jason is hold responsible to really go and replace that. And Jason is saying, give me order more machines. And then this is the typical story of Jason. What happens? 3 o'clock in the morning, he says something is going wrong. The other guy says that, guys, you can't scale the system fast enough, so I'm losing customers. So the second guy here is more of the sales guy. And here's the developer. She's saying, why my code is not up and running so far? And then here is the manager is saying update cycles are too slow. And he's the user. He's going to say, if I don't really get the game fast enough, then it's going to be obsolete. I have only a window of 1 or 2 days. And then while you do everything, he himself is saying, boom, power is out. What do I do? So he has to manage the expectation of all the different kind of people. And ball stops at him. And he has to be making sure the infra is running 24/7. See, gone are the days when you used to say that my customer support is only from 9 to 5, only on the weekdays. No, practically all the industries consuming IT is not 24/7. That means you need to have infra which is accessible 24/7. And then how do you manage? So while he's really having all the challenges, so somebody says yes, it can be managed, and who? And so somebody is coming from the window and saying yes, with Kubernetes you can manage all that. And then saying, Jason says, who the hell are you? So she says, it's me. I'm Athena, goddess of wisdom, craft, and containerized applications. So Jason says, what the hell? I thought Athena was the goddess of wisdom, craft, and war. So she says, yeah, enough wars. Now we are fighting with Corona. So she says, enough wars, but you need containers, and I'm also diversifying. So now Jason is saying what some of you guys are already saying, that yeah, I'm already using Dockers. It has hardly fixed anything. Managing all of them is still very inefficient, slow. Earlier I used to have 100 virtual machines. Now I have probably 500 Dockers. So how is container going to solve my problem? He says, yeah, listen to me. Container is just the great first step, but if you don't know how to orchestrate those puppies, then you are not going to be able to get much out of that. So this is where you need Kubernetes. So Kubernetes is, guys, not really a container platform. Kubernetes is the container orchestrating platform. And this is what we'll understand in next about 15-20 minutes, the gist of the whole thing. And I could not find a better of really explaining that than really going over this particular comic. This is amazing way of putting something together, guys. Okay, so she says, let me walk you through a history lesson. So let's do that. So this is basically, look into this particular picture. This is even more interesting. Okay, so she's saying, Jason was taken to this place. He's like, where are you taking me? So she says, yeah, welcome to the ancient time. Long ago, when wet sneakers were popular, Game of Thrones was like on season 2, and monolithic applications ruled the world. So this is basically when probably she's talking about 8 to 10 years back, where most likely Netflix just probably getting started, or some of these applications are beginning to scale. You begin to have a lot of people begin to consume the IT. And old way of doing things means just put more servers, single application, see how it works. And people are now releasing downtimes and all that is very clumsy. So Athena says monolithics had impressive feature sets, but too many interdependent parts. Integration and deployment was really a nightmare. So what did the great developers or like god or goddesses did? What they said, that if we want to bring this beast under control, then we need to chop it. So we need to chop it into microservice. And that is the literally you will be seeing what companies are doing today. You can take any monolithic application. You don't need to rewrite the whole application at the one time. You can choose to take a slice of that particular application and export that into a microservice. Remaining thing can still remain what you have, and you begin to call those microservices through the REST APIs, and things begin to really work. So this chopping doesn't mean that IT stopped for a decade. No, chopping happened very gradually, and people moved to microservices in a relatively smooth manner. Okay, so now Jason says, yeah, that looks interesting, but they need to still talk to each other. Jason says, of course, yes, but they don't need to talk at really function level. They need to talk with a lightweight protocol and just enough to cooperate. So for example, if there is a hammer and there is a nail, so hammer says, anything looking sharp, I can really hit on that. And nail says, yes, are you be hitting on me? Now, whether hammer is made of wooden block and iron, and the nail is made of steel or copper, makes no difference to hammer, makes no difference to the nail. They don't need to come from the same spec, same language. things like that. So as long as you can preserve the dependencies, and then you can tie them up to really create large applications. Okay, so thing is, if you run these services in a single OS, then it becomes very problematic thing, because a specific microservice might need some version of Perl or some version of Python or some other version of Nginx or something, and then different microservices might need something different. So if you were to put them together, it will be hard for them to really keep working. So if you put them in a single virtual machine, you have same problem. So typically what you end up doing, this is one of the questions somebody asked, what if I were to put each microservice in a different virtual machine? Of course, you can do that. There's nothing wrong with that. Only thing is, it will become a bit heavy on the servers because of the inefficiency of so many OS copies running on a single machine. So this is the literally picture. Everything will work fine. Microservice architecture is all cool. You have now different virtual machines, so they have good isolation. But now you are running too many virtual machines on a single OS or single hypervisor, so efficiency is low. That's about it. Okay, but so this is where we are talking about Docker or container. So because each microservice just needed a specific isolated environment in which it can work. It did not care about OS most of the time. See, until unless you were Veritas of the world, which were writing the kernel module, until unless you are infrastructure company, which need to really worry about whether I'm operating in the user land or I'm operating in the kernel, you just don't give a damn most of the time. All you are saying is give me the right library APIs. I don't even need to know whether this thing is running on which version of Ubuntu or not, right? I need to know the right version of libc. I need to know the right version of my Python, Perl, or interfaces. That's about it. So as long as I get the right application environment, and microservice can operate. And this is basically what is the Docker all about. So it gives the isolated environment to your application, which is typically microservice, without really having the overhead of virtual machine or full OS. Okay. Containers can be considered as a privileged Linux process. Yes. So if you see that's really how containers are implemented. Those are nothing but a single process which gives a specific isolated environment by using different things on the processor namespace, the network namespace. See, a process gives you virtual memory isolation anyway. On top of that, by really creating a namespace around the network and process PIDs, you have created a isolated environment which looks as good as a total independent OS for all practical purposes. But if you just open the lid, it's essentially nothing but a single Linux process. And if you look into the, if you do like PSM-AF or things like that on the machine which is running Docker, you're going to see all kind of processes. So there is basically single OS which has processes, and some processes begin to act as a container. Nothing more than that. Okay, so coming back to my current picture. So basically, as long as your process or your microservice runs as a self-contained process. So these three things are basically in the water, in the air, in the wind, then you are all cool. Okay. And then this is the question what somebody was really asking. So says, yeah, you're talking about containers, but did microservices really lead to containerized application? Because there was a picture we are talking about. Microservices can really run even on virtual machines too. Absolutely right. But what happens is, because microservices are so lightweight, yeah, Shyam, this is the same comic what I've taken from Kubernetes comic. So this is nothing what I have done. So feel free to access from there too. So the whole idea here has been basically microservice gives modularity, and the containers give the interoperability. So if these two things are married together is basically what happens. You get these three things: portability, reproducibility, and scalability. So I'll come to that in a minute. Okay, just a minute. Right. So basically, if you get these three things right, and if you can really run anything, anywhere, anytime across the world, then you can really solve your problem. So now Jason is beginning to scratch his head. Yeah, all of these things are kind of making sense so far. But he says my team can barely handle the containers we are running now. But if I were to ramp up and begin to create hundreds of containers, one for every microservice, it's going to be a big, big problem. How am I going to really work? So if anybody who works on Docker probably can really correlate the problem. See, every instance of a container I create, I need to figure out what are the port on which I'm going to be exposing my services from a specific container, from a specific node. So how do I manage all that is up to me. I understand now with the Dockers, you have Swarm, which is essentially nothing but a container orchestration platform, and Kubernetes is the other container orchestration platform. So point I'm trying to make is, or what Athena is saying is, you really need a platform which will automate all the containers. Without that, it just won't work out. And this is the reason Kubernetes is kind of taking over the world in just last few years. Before that, basically, Docker became very, very interesting. The journey of Docker, the rate at which Docker became proliferated has been amazing, humongous. Okay, so now coming to Kubernetes. What is Kubernetes? Kubernetes is Greek for helmsman or captain. Again, with the logo, she's saying this is from Google Cloud. Yes, it's from Google, but what has happened with Kubernetes is it's all open source. And Google has no direct control on Kubernetes right from the beginning. It has put in a very independent foundation called CNCF. Anybody can really consume it. There is nobody who says only I can provide support for the Kubernetes. And it's a big community of developers and things like that. So forget about the sales switch part. So main thing about Kubernetes is, Kubernetes has few very, very interesting key goals. So very first goal is making sure that we can distribute the containers in a very, very logical manner and in a very efficient manner. So the question of efficiency is essentially something which will maximize the capacity of server which is going to be running the containers. Second is I should be able to scale up and down, which is adapt to the demand. And third is 24/7. It has to be always running. Can't afford to, there are no downtime anymore. So need to have something which will take care of that. And most importantly, interoperability. Most importantly, basically, whatever you really want to do, it should give you the power to doing that. You don't want to worry about how. And you don't want to really micromanage each and everything. And that means our dear Jason can potentially have some good time on the weekends. Okay. See, so far what we have done is we have just created a story saying that why Kubernetes becomes interesting. So next bunch of slides on this comic book is essentially going to introduce Kubernetes, fundamentals of Kubernetes. Pay more attention about internals of Kubernetes for in the next few slides. Again, at very high level, but this is so far all we have done is we have created a background saying that why Kubernetes is interesting. Now we are going to talk about what is Kubernetes. Okay, so what Kubernetes has done is it has taken the container and created an abstraction on top of container called pod. So pod is basically a Kubernetes specific term. You are not going to be finding this term with the Docker. Okay, so basically it's a new abstraction called pod. So pod are the smallest building block in the Kubernetes system. So a pod is the container, but Kubernetes sees only the pod. Kubernetes doesn't see container directly. So this is one fundamental concept what you probably want to make a mental note of. Okay, and then most of the pods are typically having one container, but if you have a logically tightly coupled containers, then some of the pod can have multiple containers. So typically you might find a couple of containers in a pod. Yes, Ankit, containers runs inside the pod. So pod is a logical abstraction, and so containers are within the pod. Okay, and now group of pods basically are really running into something called node. So node is basically nothing but your virtual machine where you are really hosting the whole environment. So you have a cluster of machines, could be cluster of VMs typically in the real cloud environment. And if you are, or if you have your own dedicated cluster of physical machines, so node could be your physical machine too. So a pod can manage more than one container, but see, for example, if you wanted to really have a 10 pod or 10 container NGINX environment, you will not create a single pod with the 10 copies of NGINX, but you will create 10 pods of NGINX, each having one container. But if you had an environment where you wanted to have a one container, which is your, let's say, NGINX, and you have second container, which is Logger, then you might really put these two containers together because you did not want to put the logging code inside the Nginx container. So, but if you want to scale up and down, you will use pods. But within the pod, you might have tightly coupled few containers together. Okay. So each pod will be hosted on a different physical machine. Not really. A set of pods are going to be hosted together on, basically physical machine is nothing but a node. Okay, so a node will have a lot of pods, but from your point of view, you'll just manage pods. So uh, let's pause that particular question for a minute, because next set of slides will really clarify that whole notion. Yes, so Deepak, you are right. You can say one node is a collection of pod, and a pod is typically one or two containers, and every container is essentially nothing but running a container image or Docker. Okay, so basically, you basically have a cluster of nodes or cluster of virtual machines, which is becomes your cluster. And then basically what you do in a Kubernetes environment is you essentially create a specification of what you want. So that's called manifest, or basically you really create a YAML file where you just define what you really want as your eventual configuration. Nilesh, I think today's I might overshoot by another 15-20 minutes, if that's okay. I scheduled it for an hour, but I will go something beyond that. Okay, so basically what you do is you create a battle plan, which is nothing but a YAML file. And all you are doing there is you just define that what all need to be there part of your final environment, which is going to be a bunch of pods, and each of the pod really having what are the containers in which pod, and that's about it. And then basically you will give this YAML file to the Kubernetes, and now all the things Kubernetes will take care of things from there. And now Kubernetes job is essentially to make sure create an environment as per your specification. It will be it's going to take your YAML file and pull the container images from your Docker registry. Could be your private registry, could be public registry, whatever it might be, and then will create the whole environment as per your specification. Okay, so this particular slide becomes very interesting. So when we are creating this environment, Athena asks, like, do you really care about what motherboard you want to pick? Or like even which Linux distro? Do you care about Ubuntu, Debian, or whatever? And you care about which IP address you want to pick? Maybe, but most of the time I don't really care, right? As in, DevOps person, do you really care about which OS things are running? Yeah, Vinayak, I'm going to be recording and going to post it on YouTube in next few days. Okay, so basically from DevOps point of view, as long as things are running, a request comes to some specific your the URL. As long as there is a process to handle that, you pick the right file, right processing. It doesn't really matter basically what is the IP address which picked up your request and served it. Which location your even OS is running or your process is running, you don't even care about that, right? Which machine things are running, you don't really care. As long as things are up and running, job get done, that's all we really care about, right? So this is the beauty of Kubernetes, guys. You just focus on what you want and you just give the resources to the Kubernetes and expect it to really take care of things for you. So basically, all the containers which are made from same image are interchangeable. They are basically, see, anybody knowing containers, you know that all you are creating is an immutable image. So that means all the containers are same. If I have multiple copies, all of them are going to be acting more or less same until unless I'm having some stateful thing. We can ignore that for a minute. Okay, but I can interchange these machines. And then I can drop in these replicas in a right kind of a server so that I can really increase the capacity of those things whenever I see the right opportunity. And what happens if something goes down? If something goes down, all I need to be doing is the Kubernetes will really monitor each and everything and figure out what is the difference between what you wanted versus what is there, and just create the different whatever are the content need to be created in pods and just schedule them on some machines which has right capacity. And before you even know, things will be just fine. And next thing what Kubernetes has is self-healing. So everything in the Kubernetes is really monitored all the time. Your containers are monitored by pod. Your pods are monitored by your deployment controllers. Node is being monitored. Service is being monitored. So anytime there's any failure, the Kubernetes will keep checking these things against your manifest, and just whenever it finds there is some difference in the state, it will allocate resources, bring it on, and take care of everything. So this is the kind of promise it has really made. So manifest is nothing but a YAML file, Vignesh, where you have specified what you want, which version of which containers you wanted, how they were connected, what is the service, things like that. I think it will become clear as you begin to really see how do you typically create an environment. See, typically today what happens in an environment, so-called manifest is a loosely defined instructions coming given to a DevOps person. Please deploy so-and-so version of my software on this database, that database, so many copies. That's basically a manifest which is not formally defined. But with the Kubernetes, you begin to define your manifest in YAML file very formally. But once you define it, given to the Kubernetes, you say, this is what I want to be always. Make sure, basically, you delegate the responsibility of your manifest implementation to the Kubernetes. So as long as there are resources available, Kubernetes will make sure things are monitored all the time, and it begin to work. And that is the power of Kubernetes, guys. And then he says, what about the updates? So she says, same idea. If you are changing a image from current A to A plus, then I will begin to really roll out new A plus images, begin to roll off the old A images. And as long as I make sure there is services or there is something else called load balancer, begin to talk to A plus and can live with A also, then it become rolling upgrade, which is a very difficult problem to solve otherwise, guys. And then basically, yeah, Murli, that's absolutely right. Okay, so basically, everything of one type, using labels, you can say all of those things are essentially same from your point of view. So I think I talked about this thing, which is basically you rely on Kubernetes to really monitor each and everything all the time. Okay. Yeah, so IT team and DevOps person, similar role in prospect to Kubernetes, yes. Okay, so now she's saying is just as modularity and immutability foster continuous integration. Containers and Kubernetes are enabling continuous delivery. So these are the two things what we are talking about, guys. CI/CD is essentially which is basically a certain way of doing things in IT. I believe that is becoming reality with the infrastructure like Kubernetes. Okay, so now it's more of the comic part. I think the heavyweight lifting of introducing Kubernetes has been kind of taken care. So now she takes our friend Jason for a ride, and Jason says, "Okay, looks like there are some loose parts coming out." She's saying, "No, don't worry, don't stop, don't really do anything. It's all fixed, and not only fixed. I will upgraded this thing to the new model. It's more like rolling upgrade without you really stopping your journey." So in few hours time, so I have taken more like 25-30 minutes to really walk you through this comic. And in real world, probably let's say 5-6 hours has passed, and Justin is saying, "Yeah, I'm convinced. Now Kubernetes seems to be the best way to manage containers." He says, "Great, my job is done." So he says, "How long it will take before I can really get something up and running?" So I said, "Probably it's going to take a few weeks." He said, "No, probably I can get you started on Kubernetes at least in half an hour, 1 hour. At least get you started is not going to be too difficult," was her promise. And that's basically all about Kubernetes. Okay, guys, I'll take a pause here. So any comment, questions so far, guys? Yes, so difference between, so difference between basically the Docker Swarm and Kubernetes in some sense, main difference is, see, Swarm has been designed so that you can really manage multiple nodes. You can really distribute your container to the multiple nodes. Is something what Docker Swarm does. But Docker Swarm is again an orchestration engine, and Kubernetes is also an orchestration engine. But the scale at which the Kubernetes has taken care of other problems like networking, storage, the deployment, scaling up, scaling down, and all those things. So it has really taken the orchestration problem and solved it really, really well. At core of it, yes, both of them are orchestrator. And just to make a point, like if you see, the Docker as a company was counting big time on the Docker Enterprise Edition. That's how they used to make money. But just in last couple of years, number of people who are using Docker Swarm even today has reduced significantly compared to number of people who are using Kubernetes. It's more like 80-20. And it came to the point where Docker Enterprise Edition was even sold off the Docker company to a company called Mirantis, which is essentially some kind of a management consulting company. So I think Docker as a company has also more or less given up on the Enterprise Edition of Docker to really be the potential contender for this space. So it seems to me at least that Kubernetes is the clear winner here, but both of them are orchestrator from design point of view. So how K8s helps over Docker? I think before the whole idea is you need a tool on top of a container to manage, because Docker on its own is nothing but a container. You need somebody to really manage all that. So it's more like if you have a great orchestrator, then the symphony happens. Otherwise, you might have a great a musician on its own. But if you want symphony to happen, then a lot of things has to come together. That's where the Kubernetes has made all the difference. Okay, guys. So, okay, what I will do is basically, So does Kubernetes works only with the Docker containers? Not really. Kubernetes support other container runtimes too. But in containers space, I think the Docker has been the de facto standard. So I'm not aware of any other very popular container ecosystem per se. Although Kubernetes has taken great pain of making sure that it is never tied to any specific environment per se. Yeah, so Rocket Podman, I think as long as, so Kubernetes has given an interface called basically container runtime. So as long as anything which is written to that specification, Kubernetes will support that. So I'm not personally aware of how to run the Rocket container directly there, but as long as things are written to container, basically specification, which is an open specification, things will work fine. Okay, guys, I'm kind of Swarm is good enough. Yes, if it works for you. But if somebody who has not started using any orchestrator, then I will certainly recommend the Kubernetes. But there's no real reason for you to really go off the Swarm right away. Although I'm not a great expert in Swarm either, what I'm seeing is people who started on the Docker Swarm, they are still quite comfortable there. But particularly once you start really looking to the HA capability of the Kubernetes, that how I'm going to manage my networking, how I'm going to really do the rolling upgrade, security, all that, then you might be able to see the value of Kubernetes. So my session is going to be, do look at Kubernetes in a lot of detail, Sanket, and then make the decision to see whether Swarm really still fits your bill, or you think much higher value on Kubernetes. But there's no reason for you to stop using Swarm just because Kubernetes is interesting enough. Okay. So what I'll do is over next bunch of slides, I will do just Kubernetes doesn't have more like community edition and at least no, there's nothing like that. Kubernetes is just Kubernetes. Just in everything is open source. And Kubernetes itself is more of a initiative driven from CNCF, which is Cloud Native Compute Foundation, whose goal is to really promote cloud native computing. And that foundation has not only Kubernetes is not the only project of the CNCF. There are a bunch of other projects which are also being promoted by CNCF. So support typically, if you want from Kubernetes, then it's mostly supported by communities. But there are companies like OpenShift, another solution which are built on top of Kubernetes. So that's where you might get Kubernetes support. But Kubernetes is not just one company's initiative, unlike Docker. Okay, so let me come to, so I basically next bunch of slides are essentially going to set a baseline to see how I'm planning to conduct these series of webinars or workshops over next few weeks. So basically, I'm not making any lot of assumptions about the background of the folks. So I'm trying to introduce things from very basic. So what I did with the Kubernetes, I will do something at similarly for Docker. Of course, I have no other comic here. I'll just try to give high-level view of Dockers, and then really focus on why Docker became very, very interesting. Okay, so what is basically a Docker? So Docker at very high level is very, very simple concept. Once we have seen the basic of this is, it's basically has helped application developers to really create isolated environment. So from Docker point of view, at high level, there are two different concepts, and this is something what we should really spend some time trying to understand. So there is something called Docker images, and there is something called containers. So these are two different things, guys. So image is more like, so I give an analogy, is more like I might have a binary of a program in a file as like .exe or basically .a file or whatever. So that is more like a program. But when I execute that particular program, I get a process. So similarly, image is something what I wanted to create an environment. So my image could be microservice. It could be a specific instance of nginx, it could be something. So whatever bit of code I wanted to run forms my image, and using that image I basically instantiate a container or a set of containers. So these are the two things somebody need to understand. So essentially, once you create container, then you want to scale it up and down, you can do all that. But with image, you want to do two things. First is you want to build an image, and once you have built the image, then you want to share it. And when you run it, it becomes container. So these are the three concepts somebody need to understand: building of the image, how do you share it, and then how do you create container out of that. Sorry guys. Okay, so coming from OS background, a question which naturally comes is why containers became so popular. So if you look from the Docker's website and other literature, you'll say that container is popular because complex application can be containerized. They are lightweight. They don't have all the heavyweight load of running full OS. They are portable, loosely coupled. You can easily scale them. You can secure. So all these are the typical, I will say, like quote unquote, marketing material to really justify why containers are popular. As an engineer, I could question them. Yeah, this is the set of thing you put across everything. Virtual machines 10 years back were having the similar reasons to say why they are interesting. But why container kind of took off in a very, very short time, I was trying to find the answer to that. And it turns out to be the so this probably we're talking about number of times, so I'll skip this slide. Okay, so let me come to this image part of the container, then I'll come to the Docker architecture of Docker ecosystem per se. Okay, see, the reason the Docker became interesting was not just the way Dockers can be created or containers can be created. See, long back in the BSD world, in the Solaris world, there used to be something called Solaris jails, which was Dockers are pants. Yes, Dockers are Dockers, right? Okay, that's a good way of putting Raj. So basically, the BSDs, the Solaris, they had jails, which was essentially nothing but isolated environment. But that concept never really took off for a couple of decades. But with the Docker, they have taken the same concept. But main thing what they have done is they have created the whole ecosystem where images can be constructed, distributed, and they built the interesting technology where lightweight ways of creating and distributing images became possible. And that is the reason the Docker ecosystem has taken off. The main reason, in my opinion, for Docker to become interesting is not only the Docker engine, but it's all about Docker Hub. All about, if you want something, you need to just say Docker run so-and-so version of a particular image, and boom, it will figure out what all layers of the that image you already have in your machine or in your company or some of your network, and only the image deltas which are not there, it will just bring those things in. And your first Docker image might take some time, but subsequent copies of those Docker deltas are very fast to pull and get ready. So the image management has really made all the difference in the Docker world. Okay, so having said that, let me come to the Docker architecture. So on a typical machine, let's say my own machine here, so you can see my machine here, I guess, right? Okay, so this is basically my machine here. All I'm doing there is, okay, let me hide this fellow. So you are seeing basically there's containerd which is running on my machine. I don't have any Docker instances right now on my machine. I killed all my Dockers. So Docker ps-a doesn't really give me any Dockers which are running right now. So if I do like this command called Docker images, I'm seeing these are the bunch of images which are there on my machine. So here basically I can take basically one of the Docker image and okay, so Docker. So basically what I'm trying to show here is these are the images which are there on my machine right now. And if I want to really create a container out of that, typically what I will do is I will say like Docker run -d. So I have an image called, forget about the name. So I'm taking an image called hello world, and all I'm saying is let me run a Docker called Docker this. Okay. So what I've done so far is basically I've demonstrated is that I've just now created a container from the image called hello world. Although that particular Docker container was not doing much, so it just did a job of printing something and exited. So let's not get into that for now. So on my machine, basically, I have a Docker system which is installed and running, and I have a bunch of images. And right now, all I have done is I have created a container which started exited in few seconds time. Okay. So basically, on a given machine, when I'm really having a Docker environment, so on my machine, I had a daemon called dockerd. And my Docker command, which was my Docker CLI, was essentially interacting with my Docker daemon using REST API. And then basically, I demonstrated that I can take an image and I can create a container out of that. And something what I'm not going to demonstrate in today's activities is how do I manage storage, how do I manage the network in this environment. So this is something I will not really demonstrate today, but these are the 4 aspects of a Docker ecosystem. You have images, you create container, you manage storage, you manage network, and that's how you can really make sure your environment really have working. Containers are working properly in your environment. Okay, so now let's look into a little bit of the internals of Docker architecture. So in the Docker architecture, basically what you have is your Docker host is nothing but the server in which you are running Docker daemon. And Docker daemon takes the images, and registry is something where your images has been posted. So typically there is a global registry called Docker Hub. So typical operation, what you do is you fire a command called Docker run. This is what I just did a few seconds back. Was I said Docker run hello world. I did not really even tell Docker from where it's going to file hello world image. So it basically the Docker client basically told the Docker daemon that this is the command this is the image what need to be run or create a container. So it basically first went and figured out was there any local image. In my case, yes, it was already available. So I just created a container out of that. Otherwise, it would have contacted the registry, would have pulled an image, kept a copy of that image locally, and then created a container out of that. So that's basically how the whole ecosystem really works very, very efficiently. Okay, so basically, I'm not going to go over the instructions of saying that how you can install the Docker on your environment. The instructions you can find on the Docker sites. it's relatively trivial to really create the Docker community edition is something what you might want to install on your environment. And then just start is just by doing the Docker run hello world. And that's how you are going to get your first container up and running. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm probably going to skip this part of building and publishing image. Modi, I'm not going to be really creating the 3-node environment. My workshop is going to be mostly around, so I'm going to be using Minikube, which is essentially going to be a single node environment, what we'll be creating. Not really a 3-node environment what I'll be using in my setup here. Okay. So basically, typically what you will do is, so this particular slide, what it basically does is it takes the same image or some other image called the bootcamp, and it creates 5 different containers of that image. And so all I'm doing is I'm hanging a while loop in which I'm really saying Docker run, and it takes my image, which is Anurag Docker Bootcamp, and name of the image is the tag of on that image is 8081, and I'm publishing the port number 8081 on as a different port mapped on my Docker host here. So if you see here, when if I were to do like Docker PS, I'm going to be seeing 5 different Dockers, all of them, although are exporting the same port from the Docker image point of view, but they have been mapped to different port to the host. So this is how typically you are going to be creating and managing the different Dockers running on the same host. And as you were to start looking to the Kubernetes, you will figure out the way these things has been done from network management point of view in the Kubernetes is very, very different. And that basically essentially makes the Kubernetes very different a beast to manage not just the Docker, but to manage the networking and storage. So these are the 2 areas in which things are going to be done very, very differently. Okay. So what I'll suggest is basically all of us should really figure out how to create an image, basically build an image, and then create an account on the Docker Hub and publish your image there. And I think that will be a good starting point to really get started on the Kubernetes. Okay. So I think I will basically pause here for today's session. I will just take you, I'm not going to run through the Kubernetes architecture today. I will basically move that thing to the next session. Okay, so I will come back to some of the reason like is Kubernetes is different from PaaS platform like OpenShift. So OpenShift is built on top of Kubernetes Vibhor. OpenShift is essentially more like equivalent of Docker E in some sense. So Red Hat has created OpenShift on top of Kubernetes. Okay, so I'm planning to basically do a 5-day paid training program on Kubernetes starting from next week. So I'll be doing 4 hours every day for 5 days. It will be a paid program. We are going to do a lot of hands-on labs. I'm going to be keeping the cost of that about $500 per participant. I'll be doing 2 batches, one in the morning, 10 to 2. Second is in the night time, like 8 to 12, so that people from different locations might be able to join. I'm willing to give discounts for anybody who want to join the program. So you can even quote the price, what you think might be appropriate for you. And I will also have some few free seats. I'm going to justify why it should be free for you. So my whole goal is to basically create a Kubernetes capacities. I'm here to help people getting bootstrapped, and I'm here to also really see if I can make a business out of that. And something where I need help, guys, is if you can really help me getting any kind of Kubernetes trainings at individual level or corporate level, I'll be really appreciating all that. If you think wherever you are working in your company or country, there is any Kubernetes related consulting opportunities, I will be willing to collaborate on those opportunities also. So I might contact some of you over next few days or week or so to see if is there something where we can collaborate together. Okay. Yes, I can really travel to different places once traveling is allowed. But before that's true. So we can certainly do that. So I will continue the second session in the same series next week. But anybody who couldn't join today, I will repeat the session again on this particular Friday. And if you think any way you can really help anybody want to participate in my paid training, feel free to connect with me. So it was real good talking, interacting with you. So looking forward to have you guys for my next session next week. Okay, thanks guys. Yeah, so that it will be next week the same time. I'll try to keep that. If any change, I'll publish on basically I'll create a mailing list of all the folks who joined, who signed up for the program. So I'll create a mailing list of that. We'll publish the next week's plan on that. Chalo. Yes, stopped. Yes. Right? हाँ, कट कर दिया ना? Stop. Stop. अभी भी आ रही है.